In this module, we're going to discuss the concept of differentiation. This is probably one of the most important topics that we discuss in this class because differentiation really means to not only recognize but embrace the differences in our students that are found in our class. Now, Dr. Tomlinson, who you'll read about this week, proposes that there's 4 different ways to differentiate in your classroom. You can change up the content that's being taught. You can change up how you teach it. You can change up the assessment that you give. So that's what's represented in this cartoon over here is you don't have to give students the same exact assessment. You don't have to give them individually the same assessment. You don't have to give them as a class the same assessment every single time. And then you can also change up the learning environment in which the content is being taught. With that being said, why do we differentiate? So what is the point? Differentiation promotes equity in your classroom. A lot of people get confused the difference between equality and equity, so I really think this visual does a fantastic job of explaining the difference between the two. So in the first picture there, you see inequality. The tree is leaning over to the left, so the kid over on the left-hand side, of course, gets the apple. The child on the right-hand side does not. Neither one of them are provided any tools or any help, but again, that would be an example of inequality. Now, equality is providing tools and assistance, but you're providing the same exact tools and assistance to these two students, expecting that they're both going to be able to reach the apple. Well, the poor student over there on the right-hand side, being that the tree is leaning to the left, totally does not get any apples, but the one on the left does. We see this a lot on a mindset of, hey, this is promoting fairness in my class. Well, look at the picture. Is it really fair to give both of those students the same exact tools and expect them to be able to reach their end goal? Now, equity is what we're shooting for. Equity is providing custom tools that will identify and address inequality. We are giving both of those students there a ladder, but we're giving the one on the right-hand side a little bit taller ladder so they can both reach their end goal, so they can both get the apple. Now, justice is what we would hope for. Justice is fixing the system. So notice what they've done here is they fixed the tree. Now, once we fix the system, then we can give both students equal tools, so equal ladders to be able to reach the top of the tree. Now, unfortunately, the educational system is flawed. It is just like the tree in the first 3 pictures. It's flawed. It's a flawed system. Sometimes as teachers, it is completely out of our hands to be able to fix the system. But what we can promote in our classroom is equity. We can promote giving custom tools to our students so they can both reach their end goals. Now, how do we differentiate in our classroom? One way is through using Gardner's multiple intelligences. So in 1983, Howard Gardner wrote a book called Frames of Mind. And essentially what that did was that outlined several different distinct types of intellectual competencies. And you can see those in the picture right there on the right-hand side. He wrote that we may all have these intelligences, but just due to genetics or prior experience, we may just lean one more way than we do the other. Now, a lot of people have argued that this theory has been completely debunked, and maybe it has. Maybe we have all the intelligences. I don't know. But I will say, however, I think we can all agree that our students prefer to learn differently. We as adults prefer to learn differently. So I do feel like we can take this theory and we can take this wheel here and use this as a way to differentiate not only our instruction, but our assessments as well. So how do we do that? I think this chart does a great way of taking each one of those intelligences, and it shows you not only how you can incorporate those intelligence into how you're teaching, but it shows you over there on the far right hand side how you can incorporate those intelligences and how you assess a student's learning. So maybe one day you teach musically, maybe one day you teach linguistically, maybe one day you teach visually. In terms of assessments, maybe you give your students choices based upon their intelligent type of how they want to present to you that they've learned. Multiple intelligence really focuses on students' strengths. You can provide flexible grouping opportunities to students based upon their intelligence types. It also promotes choice in a student's learning. Choice boards are such an awesome way to differentiate in your classroom. It is allowing students to choose how they're going to demonstrate to you that they've learned. It also embraces Gardner's multiple intelligences because they can demonstrate to you in a variety of different ways. Maybe they make up a song. Maybe they act it out. Maybe they draw something. Maybe they utilize technology. It's going to really increase motivation in your students because they feel some ownership over their learning and how they're going to express it. Choice boards are versatile. They can be used for any grade level. It can be used for any subject area. As educators, y'all, we beg, borrow, and steal. You do not have to create your own choice board. I guarantee if you just search the subject or the topic and you search choice board, there is one out there that you can adopt for your own classroom. When I used to do choice boards with my students, I did a tic-tac-toe approach. So I would give a choice board and I would tell students you have to pick 3. You can pick them horizontally or vertically or diagonally because maybe there were a couple of assessments that I wanted to ensure that students were choosing. But at the same time, as a student, when you present it that way, it's still giving them autonomy on which way are they going to choose. Now, I do want to emphasize differentiation is for every student in your class. It's not for a particular set of students, it's for all students. However, there are certain groups of students where differentiation is vital. And one such group of students are going to be your students that you have in your class that have special needs, whether that be academically or whether that be physically. Many of those students will have in place what we call an individualized education plan or an IEP. These are plans that outline the accommodations that those students receive. Usually that plan is developed between the special education teacher and the parents. Also, you may see what we call 504 plans. It's very similar to an IEP. One of the main differences is 504 plans include all age groups where IEPs are K-12. During my time, I had much more experience with IEPs than I did 504s. Something that I provided for you this week, provided a document that gives you a list of accommodations that you may see with your students with special needs, because I want you to be prepared going into this what type of accommodations you may see. Now, I will say it could be anything from like extended time, or it may be an assistive technology that a student has to use. Maybe you have to provide written notes to a student. It could be where the student sits in class. Again, I provided you that list this week, and I do want you to go through it just so you can see what type of accommodations you may have to implement in your class. I will say, in terms of all students that have special needs in your class, make sure you develop those relationships before you focus on the academics. Really discover those students' strengths and teach to those students' strengths. I would encourage you to provide a calm zone or a brain break for your students with special needs. And in reality, I would actually encourage you to provide that zone for all of your students in your class. That's the great thing about differentiation. Usually these accommodations that you provide for your special needs students, all of your students would benefit for these accommodations. Provide frequent check-ins for your students with special needs. Multisensory learning, this is where again Gardner kind of comes into play. Providing technology can help them. And make sure you collaborate with your special education teacher. Work with that special education teacher as a team on these accommodations that you're providing these students. Another group of students that you want to make sure you're providing accommodations for are going to be your English language learners. You may see the acronym ELL. Again, just like students with special needs, you want to cultivate those relationships and you want to be culturally responsive to your students. Teaching language and vocabulary skills. And this is, again, not just for your English language learners, though it is very important for them. This is for all learners, and this is for all subject areas. Speaking slowly and increasing your wait time. Visuals are vital when you have English language learners in your classes. Incorporating technology, I will say there's a lot of translation software out there, which is wonderful, but you do want to make sure that your students are using that software for specific words that they're struggling with and maybe not the entire passage or the entire phrase, because they are trying to learn English. You want to model, so give examples and also give clear directions. Just like with your special education teachers, you're going to have your ESL teachers as well that you want to make sure you're collaborating with. Now, academically gifted learners, and you may see the acronym AIG, usually they have some accommodations in place as well from the AIG teacher. Some things that you want to make sure you're ensuring in your class with AIG learners or academically gifted learners, pre-assessing those students to see where they are. You really want to use Bloom's taxonomy. Again, you want to use that with all your students, but especially with your gifted students, is challenging them to think critically. So really, making sure you're posing questions to them that are at the top of the level of Bloom's taxonomy. Involve opportunities or offer individual opportunities for projects or giving student choice. Maybe you want to group those academically gifted learners together for certain activities in the class. I do want to emphasize, gifted students, do not just assume there are tutors in your class. Also, do not assume that gifted learners are your high-achieving students. There is a difference between the two. I have worked with many AIG students who were not high-achieving. They were not motivated students, but yet at the same time, they are academically gifted. So just do not assume that they're always going to do their work, they're always going to be raising their hand, they're always going to be ready to go, because that's not necessarily the case. Now, in terms of academically gifted students or high-achieving students, I would encourage you to incorporate possibly learning contracts in your class. So I had a student in my class named Jacob who was academically gifted. And let me tell you, Jacob, in terms of 7th grade math, he was probably at about like a 10th or 11th grade level. He knew that content already. So what I would do with Jacob is I would pre-assess him at the beginning of a unit. So maybe the unit was geometry. I would give him the assessment that I was giving at the end of that unit. Because remember, you should already have your assessments made at the beginning, right? So I would give him the assessment. If he scored an 80 or above, we had a learning contract in place. I did involve Jacob's parents with this, and I really feel like you should let the parents know what you're doing here. But it was a way that I gave Jacob a different topic, and he learned independently. He actually did quadratics and exponents and polynomials while my other students were learning geometry. And so what I would do is I would give him a task or a series of tasks that he had to complete, and he did that on his own. Granted, I checked in with him frequently. We worked one-on-one together, but it really made Jacob feel like I was recognizing the fact that he was above and beyond what we were covering in class. Now, last thing I want to mention to you is in terms of differentiation, you want to make sure you are promoting diversity and inclusivity in your classroom. You are accepting of all of your students' backgrounds, their intellects, their culture. Again, you want to promote that equity in your classroom. So what are some ways, this poster gives you, what are some ways we can be inclusive? Again, adopting your teaching strategies for different learning styles. Establish at the beginning of the class or the beginning of the semester ground rules that are going to foster inclusivity in your class. Promote inclusive language of all students, of all diverse backgrounds. Learn about your students' backgrounds when they come into class. Invite your students to share their experiences. Highlight diversity in the content that you choose to teach, whether it be books, whether it be videos, whether it be posters. Highlight and embrace diversity. Encourage participation in special events that promote diversity. Model teaching self-advocacy, modifying, again, course materials to be more inclusive, and then using lesson plans that create a safe space for the discussion of diversity. Now let's talk about the assignments that you're going to have this week to discuss differentiation. The first thing I want you to do this week is to read the e-text that I provided to you. So do know your reading this week is not coming from your textbook. I've provided you this e-text. It's this first PDF here. We're going to delve a little bit further into the concept of differentiation. The next thing I provided for you here is a resource. So I'll show you what it is. It's a list of differentiation strategies. Differentiation can seem overwhelming and it can seem just unreachable for a teacher, but it doesn't have to be. So I would encourage you to save this document somewhere to your computer, because these are all fantastic ways that you can either differentiate your lesson or you can differentiate your assessment. The other document that I posted for you here, just like I mentioned previously, this is a list of example accommodations that you may see for IEPs and 504s. So I would encourage you to look at this list just so you can start feeling comfortable with what type of accommodations that you may see in your class. Now, the first assignment that you have is a differentiation forum, so I want to get a chance for us to learn from each other. There are 4 questions that you need to answer here in your forum post. Your total response, so all 4 questions, should be 300 words. Please, I ask that you number, just like I have here, your answers to these questions. And then you want to respond to at least one other classmate. And then your last assignment for this week, based upon your reading for this week, you have a short 10-question quiz. You do only receive 1 attempt at this quiz, and it is completely untimed, so take as much time as you need. I gave the e-text this week as a PDF because I would encourage you to print it, and I would encourage you to highlight as you go, as you read. If you have any questions at all about any of the strategies that I've mentioned this week, about your forum post, or about the quiz, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.